Buenas and Hafade from Guam. You're listening to Memoirs Pasifika, a podcast series exploring events, movements, and people in modern Micronesian history. I'm Tony Asios, the show's producer. For this episode, we're welcoming back Dr. Vivian Dames, who also anchored our second episode. She's a retired professor of social work and women and gender studies at the University of Guam, with an interest in community organizing, social justice, and social policy. In recognition of Pride Month, Dr. Dames will tell the story of Guam's campaign for marriage equality through interviews with several people who played a role in the historic effort. They discuss how the movement gained momentum, the broader significance of the eventual legal victory, and current issues regarding LGBTQ rights and opportunities here. Let's begin.
On this momentous day in Guam's history, District Court Judge Francis Tidingle Gatewood stated the Department of Public Health will begin accepting marriage applications from same-sex couples, and marriage equality on Guam is now a reality. Reporting for Guam's News Network, I'm Jolie.
On June 9, 2015, Guam became the first U.S. territory to legally recognize same-sex marriage. Although lawsuits seeking legal recognition of same-sex unions in the United States began in the 1970s, this policy issue only surfaced on Guam in 2009. In comparison to the nearly half-century of legal battles in the United States, it may appear that the road to victory here was short and easy. But as we'll hear, homophobic and transphobic attitudes were de facto policy in many ways. Local resistance to marriage equality was strong, and success in changing the law was never guaranteed. Indeed, just a decade ago, many in Guam's LGBTQ community didn't believe they would ever be allowed to legally marry. So if the road to victory appeared smoother here, it was only because several generations of LGBTQ people and their allies helped pave the way for greater social and political acceptance. In 2009, Benjamin Joseph, or B.J. Cruz, was the newly elected Vice Speaker of the Guam legislature. In that position, he would be one of many to play a leading role in the local fight for marriage equality. Cruz is a Chamorro lawyer, jurist, and politician with a distinguished record of more than 4 decades of public service in all 3 branches of government. He is also a trailblazer as the island's first openly gay public official. He was born on Guam in 1951, but came of age in California during the turbulent 1960s. He came out publicly just a few days before graduating from Claremont Men's College while advocating for funding to support counseling services and support groups for gay students on campus. It was still a crime to be gay in that state, and a basis upon which you could be denied a job or fired. In fact, he worried it would jeopardize his graduation and political aspirations. But he felt ready to take a stand and tell his truth.
I was involved even then to get more awareness. I wanted them to understand we were normal. I mean, we didn't grow horns and we didn't hide under bridges and we weren't attacking kids at parks. We were just normal people with desires and aspirations. And so, yeah, in my own way, I've always been sort of rattling the cage and being open.
B.J. Cruz returned to Guam in 1974 with a law degree. Within a decade, he rose to prominence within the Guam Democratic Party and as a leader in the Chamorro struggle for self-determination. 10 years later, at the age of 33, he was nominated to be a family judge in the Superior Court. But his nomination was controversial, and Cruz faced intense scrutiny and public protests from certain church groups. Some opponents claimed that as a gay man, he lacked the strong moral character to serve as an arbiter. Others argued that because he couldn't get married or raise a traditional family, he couldn't make fair and well-considered rulings in a family court. Despite the opposition, Cruz was appointed to the Superior Court, serving 9 of his 17 years there as a family court judge. He would go on to serve as an Associate Justice and then Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Guam. In 1995, Cruz and his partner of 10 years, Jimmy Applegate, were featured in Laddie magazine for an article titled Living Gay on Guam. In the cover photo, they embraced while happily, confidently smiling. But at this point, many LGBTQ people on Guam were still not out for fear of social and career repercussions. Those who were out tended not to speak publicly about their sexual orientation. So the magazine cover garnered a great deal of attention, both positive and negative. Cruz spoke to me about why he chose to do this magazine article.
I had been in family court, and I knew that there were kids that were having problems with their parents about their being gay. And I knew that there were lots of young people that I was meeting at the bars that were having problems about what they were going to do about their homosexuality. And I wanted to prove to them, you can be whatever you want to be. You can be a lawyer. Now you can be a judge. You can love somebody. And that was the reason why I agreed to have that article with Johnny, to have others see that. When that article came out, I had calls from lots of school teachers who thanked me. They said, you don't know how much that helped with kids in our classes, that they were able to come to me and then be able to open up about the fact that they were gay because they saw that a successful man was gay and that a successful man was in a committed relationship with another man.
But while Cruz had fought for and gained acceptance, he knew that many of his gay peers were discriminated against and faced hardships due only to their sexual orientation. In 2009, as the newly elected Vice Speaker of the Guam Legislature, Cruz felt the time was right to lead a legislative push to legalize same-sex domestic partnerships. He made the decision after a chance encounter with an old friend who had fallen on hard times after the death of his long-term partner. Cruz says that in order to raise cash, the man was trying to sell expensive gifts he had once given to the man he loved. Because they were not married, BJ's friend could not receive the survivor's benefits from his partner's retirement fund.
And so they went from living 6-figure to him in the low 2 figures because he no longer had that second income. I felt so bad. So I wanted to find some way to be able to protect that, to be able to have two people have that kind of relationship so that I no longer have people calling me and crying about the fact that they're not allowed into the hospital after 20 years of taking care of someone and now on the throes of death, that they can't go into the hospital because the family has shown up and will not allow them in because they're not family. Or worse yet, being evicted from a home that you had been living in with someone for 25 years. And because there wasn't a acknowledged contract, you had no right to remain in the property or not have benefits. I mean, those were the things that drove me crazy. And so it was that protection that I wanted to provide people.
Cruz says that while he had already planned to introduce the legislation, he wanted to approach the issue with caution by first meeting with influential religious leaders.
I wanted to spend some time talking to the Archbishop, talking to the various churches, not jump right out like the kids did.
The kids he refers to were certain members of the 27th Guam Youth Congress, an advisory body which can also submit proposed legislation. But before Cruz could begin his quiet outreach process, the Youth Congress boldly forwarded a bill to legalize civil unions to the legislature of Guam. The bill was authored by Derek Baza Hills, an openly gay and politically ambitious young man who was the Youth Congress Speaker from 2008 to 2010.
my hand was forced at that point. I no longer was going to be able to gradually build up support in the community. I had to just do it right away. And the reaction in the community was, punch back. And I mean, they came at us all kinds of ways.
Is this what this legislative body want to make into law? Legalize sin?
Some have also raised questions over civil unions and parenting and how children are affected by their parents' sexuality.
According to Father Walsh, the church is not against persons who may have homosexual tendencies, but are opposed to same-sex unions because it is a threat to the very definition of marriage.
Now, when we take the gift of sexuality and use it for other purposes, it becomes intrinsically disordered.
On June 3, 2009, Vice Speaker B.J. Cruz introduced Bill 138 to establish same-sex civil unions, offering all the rights and benefits of a civil marriage. But after facing public backlash at town hall meetings, Bill 185 was introduced. It proposed gay-inclusive domestic partnerships.
What Cruz does say is that he's just trying to provide homosexual couples basic rights he thinks they deserve, without the use of the words marriage or civil union. But it appears he's still upset those who are against and for the matter.
I think the gay community is right in saying that I sold them out. It's completely different. I've taken it down to domestic partnership because the Archbishop asked me not to use marriage or to use civil union. I responded to the request that there be no ceremony by making it an application like a license. And a number of the gay community is really upset that they're not having their commitment ceremony. But I'm trying to get them some rights. I'm sorry it's not going to be the white dress formal wedding that some of them want. But
in the end, Cruz says he's tried to address everyone's concerns.
Despite its concessions, Bill 185 was also opposed by evangelicals and the Catholic Church.
In a legislative hearing last night, religious leaders condemned Senator B.J. Cruz's bill that would offer domestic partnerships to same-sex couples, with one Catholic deacon saying it would violate natural law and the sanctity of marriage. Life in the Sun Fellowship Church pastor Roy Burke also challenged the notion that same-sex partners deserve the same rights as other married couples, saying that while all people are equal, the same does not hold true for all sexual preferences.
It is also important to rightfully understand that measures of this type are demands for lifestyle preferences and should be separated from any notion of a civil right.
With Bill 185 mired in controversy, some legislators pushed for a diluted Bill 212, which provided significantly limited rights in comparison. Unlike the civil union bill, this designated beneficiary agreement would be open to both same-sex and opposite-sex couples and contain no language suggesting it was a civil union or marriage. In order to garner support for Bill 185, Derek Baza Hills and Vice Speaker Cruz joined forces with GALA, Guam's Alternative Lifestyle Association, a newly established nonprofit providing support, education, and advocacy for LGBTQ persons, their families, and friends. Here's Tim Dela Cruz, GALA Executive Director.
So there was a series of town hall meetings that we hosted. And so GALA really helped in the mobilization of advocates and supporters to inform the public of the bill and its intent, but also to allow for several speakers in our LGBT community who supported the bill to share why the bill was important to them. We had strong support from the University of Guam Division of Social Work students. They helped to organize. We met with several senators and set a social marketing campaign. We used a tagline called Legislate Love. And so we produced bumper stickers, banners, and had a petition going. And in that petition, we had about 1,100 signatures. We were at the Chamorro Village. We were at the gay bars. And we had signed up registered voters to sign that petition. And so our role really was of organizing and allowing LGBT folks to anchor their support around this.
Tim says much of the advocacy work was done by lesbian and transgender women. Young people were generally the most vocal supporters, while older members of the LGBTQ community tended to watch quietly from the sidelines.
It was a very youthful push for marriage equality on Guam. And I imagine it was because the older community really lived through so much more of the struggle of being LGBT and the discrimination. And I would imagine that the pain and the real struggle of being gay in the 60s or 70s or even 50s on Guam was more difficult for them. The youth, I think, were protected in the sense that they didn't have that as a reference. In early 2000s, it was a little bit easier to be a gay person. They saw themselves on television. Hollywood, made movies about being LGBT. There were more LGBT clubs. Many of them may have come from more supportive families. And I remember an older friend telling me too that there was so much more to lose for them because of their careers and the role that they played in the community.
Religious beliefs were perhaps the biggest motivating factor among opponents. This was emotionally challenging for many of the people advocating for the bill, as most were raised Catholic and felt conflicted.
And I remember at one town hall meeting, at the end of the panel, I had a woman come up to me and she gave me a list of Bible references and quotes from scripture, the classic scriptures of Sodom and Gomorrah and on Romans, that really was the basis of the church's teaching against homosexuality and homosexual acts as deviant and as an abomination. She came to me after and said, I would like to give you this. And if you prayed on it and read it and come to a degree of contrition and give yourself to God and to Jesus, He will save you. And I remember just quietly accepting that. And I just thought how sad it was for us to have spent the last 2 hours talking about some of, I think, very Christian things to do, that the Christian message that I think was instilled in our fight really was you had a group of members of your own community simply asking for fairness. And that was very difficult for her to grasp. And I didn't get into a fight with her on wanting to correct how she believed. In our group, that's one of the things we talked about, that we weren't going to convince people who were opposed to this. Our job was really to consolidate the people who supported this and to bring them on the table. And so we had such a big reception of both supporters and opposition at those town hall meetings.
With roughly 85% of Guam's population identifying as Roman Catholic, the Archbishop held sway over the island's culture and politics. So it proved especially difficult when he became a vocal adversary of the bill and attacked homosexuality in general.
It was reported in the news that the Archbishop Anthony Aprone, he was speaking about how the homosexual lifestyle was a selfish lifestyle, and made the comparison that suicide bombers seem to be more in touch with selflessness than homosexuality. And I just thought that we needed to respond to that, and we did. Gala, we called a press conference because we knew that in a Catholic community, it almost seemed to have the power to incite violence. And we wanted to make sure that part of the narrative didn't end there.
Archbishop Aprone remains unmoved in his opposition to the bill. Asked about the civil rights of same-sex couples, he had this to say.
Homosexual relationships in the mind of the church is not the normal way.
A hearing on the bill was set for this.
And so we called the press conference and we particularly addressed that issue. And we have been very lucky because there were other organizations, one in particular, one Christian faith that really stood for the LGBT community was the Episcopal Church. And some Catholics as well. I remember there was a petition Catholics for Equality that was being circulated, and some very prominent names were added to the listing. And it really started to show that the movement was growing.
Tim and Derek arranged a meeting with Archbishop Anthony Apparon, who was joined by a priest and a deacon.
And I was a practicing Catholic at the time, and so was Derek. And we really also wanted to meet with him to convey the pain that many of us in the LGBT was feeling because of the way in which the church had chose to fight and oppose what we were doing. We shared, that pain of how vicious their opposition was, and it was harmful. And I remember the Archbishop saying that he had loved us and that he had apologized for that. But he said very little in that meeting. And so the priest who was joined by him really was there to restate their position, what the church's stance was, and talked about why the Catholic Church couldn't support this because of how contrary it was to their teaching, and fundamentally how it went against the whole sanctity of marriage.
BJ, what's an aspect of the public hearings on Bill 185 that is still fresh in your mind?
I realized how polarizing it was. I mean, at the hearing, to have a daughter on one side testifying in favor of it and her mother on the other side testifying for it, a sibling on one side testifying for it and a sibling on the other side testifying against it. I felt bad that it caused such a polarization within the community, because that was not my intent.
Tim, what moment from the public hearings most stands out in your mind?
One of my happiest moments that I had while we were pushing for marriage equality was having my parents at the public hearing. And my parents sat in the corner where most of the opposition sat. And I think my mom and dad sat there because it was where the Manumco sat. They just naturally sat where their peers sat. There was such a huge generational divide in the push. But they sat there and they were holding a sign that said, "I love my gay son." That in itself was such a big win for me too, so.
Despite the tremendous outreach efforts, Bill 185 failed in committee. Disappointed yet still determined to force change, its proponents reckoned with what they did achieve, even while falling short of their larger goal.
We were hopeful, but we knew it was a struggle. And I think my hopefulness was framed in the sense that the outcome may be that the legislation doesn't pass, but the victory is the mobilization of the community, the elevation of a discussion that never really happened in such a commanding way. In the early days, a lot of the organization of this happened in my dining room, and it happened in other people's homes. And I remember saying that we're asking the community to take on same-sex marriage, and we haven't even asked them to take on other gay rights like discrimination, and we went for the top prize. And so even if we were to walk away getting legislation passed that would allow for us to address some of the denial of rights that we were pushing, and it wasn't called marriage, even if we had that, I remember saying at the time, for many LGBT couples, it would have been a win too. That drew some very passionate responses from some of the younger members in our fight who were very idealistic, and those that were in relationships who saw a very practical side to their fight of just simply being included in their partner's health insurance, to have visitation rights at the hospital. Those were the things that we were fighting for in the language of the bill. And I think some also saw the marriage as a symbolic gesture, right? That we wanted to call it marriage.
Tim and his partner Jonas were traveling in the mainland United States when they learned that Bill 185 failed. So then and there, they decided to register for a domestic partnership.
Gosh, I'm a very practical person. And I wish I had a very romantic love story of how our marriage started. But so I never said, will you marry me? It was, we'll just file for domestic partnership while we were here. And I laugh about it. And I think it was because in my mind, growing up as a Catholic, I also believed that marriage didn't belong to me, that marriage was never something that belonged to the gay community. And I was fighting so much on Guam, convincing people that we wanted what you had. And it was easier to say, we just wanted fairness. When I think in my heart, what we really wanted was to be accepted and to be part and to belong. I think that was part of my internal conflict. And I settled for simply a domestic partnership. So when I went to Washington, where my sister had lived, she said, you can file at the Department of State. You just need to fill out an application online and have it notarized. And so her sister-in-law happened to be a notary. So that morning we went to the State Department in Olympia, Washington. My nephew, who was in high school at the time, my sister let him miss school to come with us. And so it was my sister, my brother-in-law, and my nephew, and Jonas and I. And we stood in line just like you would at the DMV. And we filed for our domestic partnership. And at the time, Washington State, I think, had the more progressive sort of domestic partnership. It was known as everything but marriage. So it resembled and looked like marriage. And it was a domestic partnership. And so when it was done on the right after, my sister turned to my little nephew and said, do you understand what just happened? He goes, yeah, Uncle Timmy married Uncle Jonas.
In 2012, same-sex marriage became legal in Washington. Soon after, Tim and Jonas received a letter in the mail saying their domestic partnership could be dissolved and be classified instead as a marriage. They simply signed a form online and were sent a marriage certificate. At the time of our interview, Tim and Jonas have been a couple for 20 years.
The greatest testament to that marriage has been, and I believe this so much, that there has been the presence of God in our relationship. And gosh, I don't think any amount of having to stand in an altar for me at this point would create any more satisfaction than it has been in this marriage that we've had. And I think that has been, for me, the greater blessing.
James Moore and his long-term partner, Larry, also chose to marry in a civil ceremony while visiting family in the States in 2013.
And Iowa had passed a same-sex marriage bill. So I turned to Larry, which was probably the most unromantic proposal ever, and said, well, as long as we're there, we might as well get married, Larry. And he said was, all for it. And so we drove to Iowa on June 12th and got married in Mason City, Iowa. But we did want to have a church blessing.
Reverend James Moore is a deacon at St. John's Episcopal Church on Guam. An island resident since the 70s, he was active in several LGBTQ organizations which preceded GALA, of which he is now the board president. Although gay marriage was not legal on Guam, the Episcopal Bishop of Hawaii had given permission for churches to hold blessing ceremonies for same-sex unions. A few months after getting married in Iowa, James and Larry had their ceremony at St. John's.
And we had about 250 people there. And it was an educational experience for many because a lot of people didn't realize the importance of same-sex marriage to couples who had been together, especially for a long time. And many of those were our friends who had already accepted us as a couple for years, primarily from the Roman Catholic Church. So during that service, Our friend the priest gave an extremely educational sermon explaining why was it not only important for same-sex couples to have the legitimacy of a civil union, but also for those who wanted a blessing within the church, when the church was so much a part of their lives, that this should be done. And many people came up to me afterwards and said that this was the first time they'd ever been to anything like this, and how much it opened their eyes.
Although the attempt to legislate same-sex civil unions failed, there was discussion about pursuing the matter in court, a route which had seen success in several states. Here's B.J. Cruz again.
We just decided that it was only going to come through the courts. There was no way that any legislature was going to be able to do it. I mean, in the same way when I recounted what happened in the U.S., it was the courts that finally brought the rights, because if it was going to be left up to the legislatures, they respond immediately to what's being said on the street as opposed to what is the right thing to do.
Enter Bill Pesh, a family law attorney on Guam for 35 years.
I had been interested in this issue for a number of years, and I had made it known in different settings that I would gladly take the legal case to court for free if anybody wanted to challenge it. I probably would have been one of the best people to challenge it myself. My partner and I, we had been together since 1996. And over a number of years, we adopted 2 children.
He and his partner, Carmen, married in Washington State in 2014.
And here we were, from a legal perspective, 2 single men with 2 children. We were not a legal family. I thought about challenging it myself, but I was very concerned about the impact it would have on our sons. And that scared me, to be perfectly candid.
Then one day, Loretta Pangilinan and Kate Aguero walked into his office.
In 2015, Loretta and Kate came to see me, and they were interested in pursuing the case. After talking to them, I thought, wow, these ladies are perfect clients to pursue this matter. Number one, they were a loving couple. You could see that. And they were determined to right a wrong. And they were just resolved. They were not going to give up until we got a decision one way or the other. They were nice, they were polite, they were respectful, but they were forceful, and they were determined. They were just the perfect clients.
Pesh eagerly agreed to represent Loretta and Kate, but quickly realized he needed help. He brought on attorneys Jofet Alcantara, Todd Thompson, and Mitch Thompson. The Thompsons are brothers and part of the LGBTQ community. They handled the legal aspects, while Pesh handled PR. The team moved quickly, as they were fully aware that their opportunity to overturn Guam's same-sex marriage ban would soon slip away.
In January of 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear the Obergefell versus Hodges case. This was the one that was really taking the issue of whether marriage was a civil right for all people, regardless of sexuality, whether it was protected by the Constitution. And we strongly suspected that the Supreme Court would issue a decision in early summer of 2015. So we wanted to beat them. We wanted to beat the Supreme Court in its decision-making because we felt it was essential that Guam decided for itself what the appropriate response to this matter should be.
In order to take the matter to court, the soon-to-be plaintiffs would need to demonstrate that the government had violated their constitutional rights by barring them from marriage. So on April 8th, Kate and Lo, accompanied by their legal team and the news media, went to the Department of Public Health and Social Services, Office of Vital Statistics, to get an application for a marriage license.
Loretta Pangilinan and Kathleen Aguero have been in a committed relationship for more than 9 years. Today, they tried to make their commitment official by applying for a marriage license.
Because we love each other, and initially we didn't know if it would be allowed here, but we're willing to find out now.
They were denied. In fact, the Office of Vital Statistics didn't even take their application. Attorney Todd Thompson called the office's action improper.
They say that because the gender of the applicants is not opposite gender, they're not even going to take it from us.
Here's Bill Pesh again.
And I was somewhat surprised. I thought Vital Statistics would refuse to accept it or would refuse to process it. But when we got there, they refused to even give them the application. And to be candid, I was delighted because I thought it made our case even stronger.
On the following Monday, April 13th, the lawsuit was filed in the District Court of Guam. The attorneys pointed to the recent Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision in Lata v. Otter, which struck down identical bans in Idaho and Nevada. They argued that because Guam falls under the Ninth Circuit, the local government had no choice but to follow suit. A hearing was scheduled by Judge Francis Tidinko Gatewood for just under 2 months later.
We've known her for many years, and we thought that she would be a very fair judge. And we were hopeful that she would also want to resolve this issue on a local level rather, again, than letting the Supreme Court decide it. This was a civil right matter. It is a federal matter, and therefore both local and the federal court had jurisdiction to hear it. So timing was important. We thought we'd get a decision.
The timing also seemed right in terms of the political mood. The day after the lawsuit was filed, the editorial board of Guam's largest newspaper endorsed the legalization of same-sex marriage. Popular sentiment on the issue appeared to have shifted, with a poll showing a majority of Guam's people in support of marriage equality. Even Guam's Attorney General, Elizabeth Barrett Anderson, changed her opinion on the matter. She had initially endorsed the local government's refusal to provide an application. Yet 2 days after the suit was filed, she issued an opinion agreeing that Guam's marriage laws were indeed unconstitutional. She ordered local government officials to immediately process applications from same-sex couples. But Eddie Calvo, then Guam's Republican governor, did not concur with the Attorney General's legal opinion.
Since marriage equality has been thrusted into the spotlight, the governor has received criticism by the local LGBT community and nationally by groups such as Lambda. However, the governor has remained steadfast in asking the public for patience.
It's an important issue, and just by seeing by some of the passion on both sides.
However, Governor Eddie Calvo believes it's best to wait for a U.S. Supreme Court decision, which would likely resolve the issue for Guam as well.
In compliance with the governor's position, the Department of Public Health and Social Services still refused to provide marriage applications to same-sex couples.
Governor Calvo was doing everything in his power to drag it out. He wanted us to wait until the U.S. Supreme Court gave a decision, and there was no way that we were going to do that.
After weeks of preparation and anticipation, the hearing took place on June 9th. But when oral arguments ended, something unusual happened.
Somewhat to my surprise, because I expected she'd probably wait a couple days, maybe even a week, to render her decision. But instead she said, please wait, I will be issuing a decision shortly. And we thought, really? And 15 minutes later, we were called back into the courtroom. She gave her decision, she read it, it was an oral decision. And obviously it came out in Kate and Lowe's favor. And it was just a triumphant moment.
Describe the reaction in the courtroom.
Yeah, I can sum that up in one word. Wow! The audience applauded, and when the hearing was adjourned, I mean, people just went nuts. It was just probably the greatest professional experience and personal experience I've ever had in my life.
Reverend James Moore was also in the courtroom.
Yeah, it was a great day. I thought it was a huge relief. I mean, we all knew that something could happen that could prevent it. So it was a huge relief. I do remember that many of the LGBT community were there and waiting for the decision.
Here again is Tim Dela Cruz.
I was, and many of us who was in this fight and, really was quite exhausted from, 2009 and 10. It was still really a very bittersweet sort of moment for us because it was such a delay from what we had asked for then, but nonetheless, it was really a win, and many of us in that room were very excited for sure that it was in our favor.
Lo and Kate were interviewed by the news immediately after the decision was rendered.
We're excited. Thank you. First, I just want to thank everybody, but I just want to thank my family, her family, our whole entire family, our friends for coming and supporting us. We couldn't have done any of this without you guys. I'm sorry.
So what is your next step?
Marriage, wedding.
And according to same-sex couples attorney Todd Thompson, it should not have come to this.
If the government had just said when the Attorney General made her opinion that they would follow along, the taxpayers would have saved a lot of money, and this would have been resolved 8 weeks ago. We're happy to say that today, the last jurisdiction in the Ninth Circuit where this had been an issue has now been resolved, and Guam can hold its head high and say that we weren't part of that last 13 states that have left that refusing to recognize same-sex marriage. So we're very proud today. We're very proud to be Guamanians.
Although Jadine and Lauren Lujan were not in the courtroom or involved in the advocacy for marriage equality, they were in a committed relationship and thrilled to hear the news.
I remember being like, heck yeah, woohoo! Just completely shocked because when we met and we said, yeah, we'll get married, for us it was having to choose between having our families present at some kind of, ceremony, doing it ourselves, going off island and finding another legal place to do it. And so this was like, what? We could have our families, we could get married here at home. We were just like, well, now nothing's stopping us. And so we took a drive that evening, just around the island to celebrate. And, there were some pride flags that went up. There were rainbow colors and everything. And, that was pretty phenomenal for us to see. It took a little bit for it to really sink in that everyone was going to have to accept it. Whether or not you believed in it, whether or not you agreed with it, the fact was that it was a law now and we could get married.
Guam began issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples 4 days after Judge Tydinko Gatewood's ruling. Once again, Bill Pesh accompanied his clients to obtain an application at the Office of Vital Statistics.
It was very different from the first time we went in, that's for sure. Vital Statistics was very cordial. They processed it and approved it in short order. The thing that was really great is that actually there was a couple that arrived before us, Nikki Desmuke and Decia Johnson. And they deferred and said, you two led the way, you get the license first. And so they did.
The marriage of Deasia Johnson and Nikki Desmuke was all made possible by one same-sex couple, Loretta Pangilinan and Kathleen Aguero.
That's like the most breathtaking thing, the fact they were able to be here with us, and they're the ones who, paved the way and started all this. So it's definitely something to just go down in history.
And then right after that, Nikki and Decia got their license, and they had made arrangements with the director of Public Health and Social Services. He immediately married them and also married Simeon Palomo and Alba Loria. So those were the first two couples same-sex couples to get married on Guam. And then Kate and Lo followed a week later. They had a wonderful outdoor wedding on the cliff line in Tamuning.
Their wedding was officiated by Vice Speaker B.J. Cruz, a memorable capstone to the campaign for marriage equality.
And it was a celebratory. I mean, marriage always is, but this was, I think, meant so much more to so many of us that were there. It was just incredibly wonderful and gratifying. And to think that, all the efforts that that we had put into this matter were successful, and to feel that we could have a family that could be respected, accepted into the community meant a lot. So it wasn't just their wedding, it was an occasion for the LGBT community as a whole, on Guam and elsewhere too. It was wonderful.
On June 26, just 2 weeks after Guam's ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court held in a 5-4 decision that the 14th Amendment requires all states and territories to grant and recognize same-sex marriages. Joshua Tenorio was the administrator of the Superior Court of Guam. By chance, he was attending a program for court leaders near Washington, D.C. on that day.
The Supreme Court had already done their oral arguments prior to that. This was the date that they were going to announce a whole bunch of decisions, which could include the marriage equality decision. So people started assembling in anticipation, and we were at the Supreme Court happened to be there when the news came out. It was really awesome, I have to say. And I was there with my goddaughter, my good friend, and my niece. So and it was so celebratory. People were crying. The gay men's choir of DC was singing. There was just a lot of goodwill, and I felt really good. Like, wow, this country is becoming so progressive.
Bill and Cormon are one of the thousands of same-sex couples who woke up early Saturday morning to the U.S. Supreme Court issuing a landmark decision that same-sex marriage is legal in every state.
As I say, in my lifetime, I've gone from being considered mentally ill when I was a child. It wasn't until 1973 that the psychiatric profession finally said that it wasn't a mental illness, to today where we can get married. It's just been a tremendous road to progress.
And whether it's through social media or even the White House, which lit up in rainbow lights following the SCOTUS decision, Bill and Cormon appreciate this support. They note while the battle is not yet over, for today, love wins.
As of April 2021, there have been 532 same-sex marriages registered on Guam, including the marriage of Jadine and Lauren Lujan. Despite their earlier agreement that neither would make an official proposal, Jadine surprised Lauren by popping the question in February 2017 while on a trip to Hokkaido, Japan.
So it was actually pretty awesome, and I had a custom ring box made and everything. I probably searched, thousands of rings and everything, but it was a magical moment. And she actually smacked me when I proposed to her, because we said nobody was going to propose to anyone, and so it was really nice.
But the legal right to marry didn't mean they could be wed in a church or feel fully accepted as wives. This was a problem for both women who were raised Catholic.
When it comes to faith and everything, that was always something that was important to me since I was young, growing up. Both sides of my family, were very Catholic. And so I feel like maybe for me, this was one part of the acceptance of my family. My family would think that it's a real marriage if it was in church. And we never thought that would happen. We knew that the Catholic Church was never going to allow us to marry. But for me, God's blessing is the highest, the most important blessing that, any judge, any senator, any other public official could ever give us. And, we were willing to settle to have a public official marry us if we needed to, but we always knew that there would be something missing if that's where we would stop. And so it was always important for us to be able to be blessed by the church, to be accepted by the church, because I knew I had wanted to give back to the church. It was just a matter of finding a church that accepted us.
A friend suggested they consider getting married at St. John's. As an Episcopal church, it was now able to wed gay couples. St. John's even holds Pride Masses every June. Here's Lauren.
First, Jay started going to the church, to see how I was. And then, I started going. And we got close to these two Lolas. They're Filipina, so that's like grandmother. So we call them our Lolas. They're like in their 80s. They were very accepting of us. Both of them were like, you need to get married in the church. And keep in mind, we were only been going to church, 2 months? They were very persistent in us getting married at church. So Jay had the courage to ask our priest, and surprisingly, she was like, okay, we just need to go through a few counseling sessions, and then we'll be able to marry you.
In 2017, with friends and family in attendance, Jadine and Lauren Lujan became the first same-sex couple to be married at St. John's. The substantial money they saved by being able to have a wedding on Guam went instead toward an amazing honeymoon traveling the world. They continue to be active in the church which embraced them as a married couple and have these thoughts to share about celebrating gay pride.
I hope that the younger generation sees that, more people are getting involved with gay pride. And me personally, now at this point, I want to get more involved so that we can show the younger generation that it's okay to be you. It's okay to love who you love.
I'm proud of our community. I admire the people who were part of the fight and, helped us get to this point. I never thought that gay marriage or anything would be legal in this lifetime. And so for me, gay pride is a celebration of being accepted, being able to be who you are. And, I never felt like I had that opportunity to be as open when I was, growing up. And so as Lauren said, we're getting old. So we're getting older and, we're very happy with where we are now. But it's important definitely for the younger generation to have hope. And I think for me, because I never believed that this would happen, it reminds me of the importance of staying hopeful, staying faithful, and really just believing in that good fight.
The push for marriage equality spurred other significant achievements. In May 2015, Vice Speaker Cruz introduced a bill to ban discrimination in employment based on sexual orientation, gender identity, or its expression. In June 2015, just a few hours after Judge Tydinko Gatewood's ruling, freshman Senator Dr. Narissa Underwood introduced a bill to make Guam's definition of marriage gender neutral. Both bills became law that year. Adoption by same-sex couples is now permitted. Lesbian couples have gained access to assisted reproductive services, and the names of both spouses can be entered on the birth certificates of children of same-sex parents. Then, in 2018, Joshua Tenorio became the first openly gay person to be elected lieutenant governor in the entire United States. Was your being gay an issue when Lou Leon Guerrero tapped you to be her running mate?
We talked about that. We talked extensively about it. So, we started having a dialogue back in, 2016. We spoke for about 8 months before we agreed. And I'll tell you, the day that I agreed was the day after Trump won. And I told her, I think we have to do it. I was very uncomfortable with where I felt the country was going to go and how that is going to overshadow what was happening on the island as well. We talked about it. We had a frank discussion about it. And I told her, I said, are you sure that, I'm a gay man? I'm not sure if this is going to be too much of a weight. And she just chuckled and she said she didn't think that it was going to be a problem. And we just went on from there.
In contrast to when B.J. Cruz was first nominated to the bench, Josh Tenorio's sexual orientation was not publicly challenged during the campaign. At the time, Guam's Catholic Archdiocese was facing bankruptcy amid mounting charges of child sexual abuse by clergy, including Archbishop Anthony Apparon.
Quote, the evidence is very clear. These words from Pope Francis regarding Guam's suspended Archbishop Anthony Apparon. On these weekends, DM alleges Apparon would come into his bed, fondle, and rape him, despite his cries to stop. Each time ended with DM crying himself to sleep.
He alleges the Agana Archdiocese knew about the abuse, but did nothing.
Archbishop Anthony Apparon, meanwhile, has vehemently denied the allegations of sex abuse. The Archdiocese alleges he is the victim of a malicious smear campaign to topple him.
I think that the situation was such that the church probably couldn't go against us from that high moral authority because it was in the midst of trying to understand how it got to this point and how could the administration of the church facilitate or, be complicit in these decades and decades and decades of abuse cases. It's very complicated, I guess, for Catholics on Guam, right? The church is the one that facilitated colonialism, but the church has been the beacon where they've been protecting the Chamorro language at the same time for many years. There's such a paradox being a gay Chamorro Catholic. It is. I wish that the church wasn't as focused in on this anti-gay stuff. And I really wish that they were more focused in on some of the social issues.
Earlier this year, you launched a nonprofit organization called Equality Guam. Why is it needed?
I started sensing, especially during the Trump administration, when there not only was there a war on women, but there were a war on trans people and war on LGBTQ rights. There were executive actions that were going to make it against policy for gay parents to be adopting. There was, a purge of trans people in the U.S. military, resulting in all these horrible things. And I could sense that there's a lot of like-minded folks that are here on the island as well. So I felt that it was very important that we be very conscious about what's happening, especially with changes in the U.S. Supreme Court and threats on some of the progress that we've made. So I thought it's very important that we come together. And although there are several organizations out there, this one in particular is focused on advocating for policy that's going to improve the quality of life for LGBTQ persons and their families here on this island. And that would include opposing efforts to recede on some of the progress that and some of the protections that we have. And I think it's very important that we mobilize and really focus in on some of those areas that affect people's lives. To me, it's in housing, it's in healthcare, understanding that there's gaps for healthcare for LGBTQ people, especially trans people. A lot of people don't realize that there is a gap in healthcare for them as well.
Here's Bill Pesh and Lacia Casil again, both on Equality Guam's board of directors, talking about a few of the broader challenges that remain.
We can't rest on our laurels. Yes, we've made tremendous progress, but there are individuals, there are groups who, given an opportunity, will undermine the achievements that we've made over the years. And so we have to be alert. We have to be willing to take on the challenge of challenging people and organizations that try to undermine our life.
Tolerated but not accepted. We all have people in our families that are part of the LGBTQ community, and that auntie or that uncle with a roommate, their roommate is always welcome, but they're never asked about the relationship. And someone told me, she said, "Oh, my mother thinks I have a roommate for the past 20 years." That's not acceptance. That's just being tolerated. And yeah, I think it's just a mindset that needs to be changed. It's changing, slowly but surely.
Lacia Casil is founder and president of Guam Pride and was among those who testified in support of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. She was born and raised on Guam, where she experienced bullying. Lacia left the island in 1993 after facing employment discrimination at a hotel restaurant when they learned she is a transgender woman.
And I had been training with the staff for 2 weeks. And on the day they were supposed to open, they pulled me aside and said, we can't have you here. You're fired. For 20 years, I yearned to come home. I missed my island. I missed my family. I missed the beaches. And it took me a long time to get the courage to return home. In 2013, I started slowly visiting and testing the waters. And I had an opportunity in 2014 to open my business here, working with DFS, launching my jewelry line. And it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And I thought that was, a good time to go home.
And how did it feel to tell your story to legislators at that public hearing? And even to call Guam home again at a time of rapid progress with LGBTQ civil rights?
It was very cathartic because the bill was in support of protecting the LGBTQ community from being discriminated against in the workplace here on Guam. So there was a lot to celebrate. There was actually a small pride event a friend had put on at the space in the Hyatt. And it was coming full circle because we were there celebrating as the gay community in the same space where I was fired 20-something years ago. So it was a real turning point, I think, for our community here on Guam.
In a region rife with anti-gay policy, Guam's civil rights protections for LGBTQ people offer a promising niche market for the island's tourist industry.
We are a U.S. territory under the U.S. flag and therefore have legal protections. And I feel that the majority of our people are very much in favor of protecting LGBTQ rights. I think it's a perfect place where business and social activism can meet.
Well, I would love to see, personally, Guam to be a destination for LGBTQ travelers. We have a great marriage tourism industry here. And same-sex marriage is legal. So I think that we need to focus more on reaching out to that community, because if you go to Japan, the Philippines, Singapore, all these places, it's still illegal to be yourself. It's illegal to be LGBTQ. But I would love for us to be a shining beacon here in the Pacific for the LGBTQ community to come and feel safe. We have this opportunity to, reach out to them and say, hey, come here and get married here. Feel free to walk along our streets, on the beach, holding hands with your loved ones. Our community wants you to be here.
That concludes the 5th episode of Memoirs Pasifika. I'd like to thank the interviewees for sharing their stories and wish them, along with all our listeners, a very happy Pride Month. Although we just finished discussing the immense progress Guam has made regarding LGBTQ rights, it must be said that there's still work to be done. Homophobic and transphobic attitudes persist. In fact, just earlier this month, a rainbow flag was set on fire in front of the Guam legislature building. Same-sex marriage is still not legal in any nation of Micronesia, and many discriminatory policies remain in place, both locally and federally, with protections needed for LGBTQ people in housing, healthcare, and public spaces. Transgender people, in particular, are in need of greater rights and protections as they experience an outsized degree of bullying, discrimination, and violence in their daily lives. We hope this episode plays a small part in advancing important conversations about civil rights and equality while inspiring change throughout Micronesia. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll subscribe to our podcast and share it with friends. Until next time, Saina Ma'asi and take care.
Memoirs Pasifika is supported through grants from Humanities Guahan, the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, the Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities, and the National Endowment for the Humanities.